Hello and welcome to this Pali Studies tutorial. In this tutorial, we'll take our final look at finite verb inflections, namely the aorist inflection. The aorist is a term borrowed from the grammar of ancient Greek and means undefined, and as we saw in a previous tutorial, the aorist is a type of past tense in Pali. Now, the aorist inflection can seem complicated and confusing, as there are many variant endings and different ways to classify them, and then this is all cloaked in linguistic jargon. So first, this tutorial explains some of the terminology, which will hopefully give you an idea of what's going on, and then we'll dig into the inflections themselves, and they're not so difficult as you first might think. Finally, as the easiest way to recognise an aorist is by its inflection, towards the end of this tutorial I'll give a short-form summary table of all the aorist endings. The basic morphology of the aorist is actually quite simple. Like the other inflectional tenses of Pali, the aorist can be formed on either the verbal root or on the present stem, and to this a specific aorist infix is appended to create the aorist stem. What makes the aorist distinctive is a prefix called the augment, and the use of the secondary personal endings to indicate person and number. However, the aorist is complicated by the fact that there are several types of inflection, and because of sound changes caused by the meeting of consonants, formal derivation of the aorist has been difficult to pin down, which has led to several different schemes. So you may notice, if you compare different grammar guidebooks, that there's little agreement in the tables for the aorist between one and another. So the grammar guides tend to organise the aorist inflections in different ways, dividing them up into 2, 3, or often 4 different groups. But in order to get to the bottom of this, and in order to explain some terminology, it's perhaps best to begin with the Sanskrit origins of the aorist. And note, throughout this tutorial, I'll be generally following the derivations as laid out by Geiger in his Pali grammar. So, Sanskrit has 7 types of aorist infix, and we can generally divide these into 2 groups. The first is based on the sibilant s, and the second around the letter a, or the personal endings are added directly to the bare root. With the reduplicated class, the first syllable of the root is repeated, and this class is actually a subset of the a-aorist. Now these 2 general groups get referred to by various names in the grammar guides. The first group is commonly called sigmatic, the letter s being sigma in Greek, and the second group as non-sigmatic. But you'll also find these groups referred to as the first and the second aorist, as in ancient Greek grammars, and you may also see them called weak and strong. Now, Sanskrit grammar also tends to describe verbs as thematic when the stem ends in an a, and so the aorist infixes are often divided into thematic and athematic, purely based on whether they terminate in a. The good news for us is that only 4 of these infixes survive in Pali, and only 2 occur with any frequency. So let's now look at these 4 aorist infixes in turn. Taking the least frequently occurring first, the root aorist or the radical aorist is so called because the personal endings are added directly to the root without any intervening infix. And in Pali, the root aorist is confined to a handful of roots only. These roots always take the augment, and we can see a remnant of the reduplication class in the ata stem. Now, to these stems we apply the secondary personal endings. But because of the rules of Sandhi, and that not all possible endings appear in the canonical texts, we end up with a simpler table. Note that the first and second person plural forms have been lost, and stems in the second and third person singular remain unchanged, taking a null ending. So if we now apply these endings to the root da, for instance, we get a da, a da, a dang, etc. Next, the a-aorist is formed by inserting a letter A between the root and the secondary personal endings, and this form generally takes the augment, but occasionally it is missing. The combination of the A infix with the secondary ending produces the following table. Note that in the second and third person singular, the final A may be either long or short, and in the second person the ending O sometimes arises. Also, the a-aorist has retained quite a few reflexive endings, but these only appear for a few verbs. So the a-aorist is formed on a root as follows, and this is also formed on the present stem of a few select verbs too. Moving on to the sigmatic forms, the s-aorist is formed by inserting the sibilant s between the root and the personal ending. In fact, this form sometimes gets called the sigmatic aorist. It appears mainly on roots ending in vowels, and when formed on roots, it generally takes the augment. In the first, second and third person singular, it's usual to insert an e after the s, and in the plural, the s is often elided before the personal endings. Now occasionally the s-aorist is applied to roots ending in a consonant, in which case the s often assimilates, resulting in a duplication of the root consonant. Importantly, this form is commonly applied to verbal stems and bases ending in the letter e. These are the present stems of the seventh conjugation and the causatives. And when applied to these stems, they generally do not take the augment, and the s, along with an intervening I, is often retained in the plural forms too. Finally, there's the is-aorist, and with this form, the final s of the infix assimilates with the personal endings to produce the following combinations. This form is the most common aorist in Pali, where it appears on both roots, in which case it generally takes the augment, and on present stems, when it generally does not take the augment. In fact, the present stems of all verbs can take this form of aorist, and so it often gets called the stem aorist. So now we've covered how the four types of aorist are formed in Pali. If we now lay these out side by side, and ignoring the reflexive endings, we can see that they aren't actually that hard to recognise. In fact, they can, and often are, reduced to just two sets, those based on S and those based on A. In some grammar guides, these are identified as the imperfect and the aorist. But note, these terms relate to derivation, and not to their meaning, or how they're used in practice. And by far the most common inflections can be reduced to a single table for most practical purposes. So these are the ones that you need to memorise if you're that way inclined. Now in terms of usage, the aorist is an extremely important tense. It covers both statements in the simple past and in the present perfect, and also occasionally in the continuous aspect too. As this has been covered already in a previous tutorial on finite tense and aspects, I won't dwell on it here. But in addition, it's worth noting that unlike English, the aorist or past tense in Pali can be formed on both passive verbs and optative verbs as well. And sometimes the aorist inflection in second and third person is used with the particle ma to form prohibitions, in which case it has no past tense meaning and generally implies don't. And when the third person is used in this way, it generally means may they not. Well, thank you for watching to the end. Please feel free to check out my channel for more tutorials on the Pali language. And if you want to be kept up to date, please subscribe. And if you click on the bell icon, you'll get all the updates. And of course, you can always visit my website for more in-depth analysis of Pali grammar.